Welcome to Lair the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, let's discuss Pink Floyd's fifth album, Atom Heart Mother. I recently did a video listing some of my favorite epic length songs, and the title track here was one of those songs that I listed. I'm actually a really big fan of this record, and I also feel like it's kind of a hidden gem in the Pink Floyd catalog. It's from their earlier period when they were still very experimental. This album follows the Ummagumma or Ummagumma, I'm not exactly sure how it's pronounced, which is a very experimental album. It's basically one double album. One album is live and the other record is each guy in the band writing an experimental piece. This album follows in that tradition a little bit. Side one here is a combination of the band and an orchestra and a choir. What I really like about it is often there's two things that happens often when a band plays with a full-blown orchestra. You get what was kind of Deep Purple in the Royal Philharmonic, where it's like the orchestra plays, then the band plays, and the orchestra plays. There's not a whole lot of like both playing at the same time type of thing. Or you get what happened in the more modern age here in the last, let's say 20 or so years, where artists would take an album that was intended to be written for guitar, bass, and drums and whatever, bring somebody in to put an orchestra on top of that. After the album was done years ago, and then they sort of force an orchestration on top of it. And sometimes it works depending on who's doing the instrumentation. Like, I know Metallica's Symphony and Metallica thing is pretty interesting. But for me, what I like about this is that it seems like the orchestra and the choir is more blended into the music. It's like it's part of it. The band is playing along with the orchestra. They're sort of one entity, if you will. It doesn't feel like it's been forced on top of it or anything. Although the way it was really composed was apparently the band started rehearsal sessions for a new album. They composed the music underneath this. And interestingly, if you buy, or it's also on streaming, like on Spotify, the early years box set, there's various versions of Pink Floyd performing Atom Heart Mother without the orchestra. You can even find clips on YouTube of them performing without the orchestra. And it's kind of amazing how full it sounds just with the band. And you can hear a lot of the themes. David Gilmour, in the part where the choir is, he does all the ahs and stuff, just, one single line, but himself kind of singing the main lines, and the keyboard plays some of the things that you would hear the orchestra play. So they had this worked up. Apparently they had to go out on tour. Geeson was somebody that they had known. Roger had worked with him on an album called Music from the Body, which is really experimental, really out there. And they brought him in, said, hey, this needs something. Can you put an orchestra on this? And apparently it was sort of a challenging task because of the way the band had recorded their parts. This is the days before computers and click tracks and all that stuff. So he had to work all this orchestration up. But for me, I think it really, really works, and I just love it. I love the way it starts, the way it sort of builds. It's like sort of free form in the beginning, and you're hearing some of the themes, and then everything just kicks in with that like fanfare there with the brass playing that main theme of the song. I think it's awesome. I like the spot where everything drops out, and it's like sound effects. They're mixing in some sound effects. And at this time in music, the late 60s, the 60s, and the 70s, in classical music, there was a lot of experimentation with this type of stuff, using sound collages, using tape. There's actually pieces written for orchestra and magnetic tape. Varese, Deserts is an example of this. And Varese was somebody who was very influential on Frank Zappa, where they were incorporating sound effects they put up like PA speakers and have a tape running with sound effects at various points in a piece. And this was really unique at the time. So you hear some of that here, and I love that spot where everything drops out. You can sort of hear like galloping horses and the trumpets are playing like that little chromatic thing, and then it goes back into the theme. It's just great. And then it drops down, and there's that bass line, that do 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 do. You know, it goes through all that, and I love when the choir comes in. I've mentioned this before, that there's a couple things that get me going. Like a bell in music makes it epic. A choir always makes it epic. So I love when the choir comes in here. I love the ahs, you know, the way they're singing, just you know, and there's like a solo voice mixed in there. And then they start doing this thing, and I couldn't find what the musical term for it is. I think it's like Sretzna or something. I think it's like a German expression for you're singing, but you're not really singing any words. You're just sort of singing sounds. So that's really cool also. I just think it's a great piece. It goes by, I mean, it's one-sided a record. I didn't see the timing on it. I think it's probably 23 minutes, 44 seconds, but it goes by really quick. The song is broken up into different sections, but they just flow one right into each other. Apparently, the original working title for this was The Amazing Pudding, which I think is would have been an awesome name, but I guess they didn't settle on anything. They didn't have a title. They were going to perform it somewhere, I think, and this is before the album was released, and Geeson said to Roger Waters, you got to come up with a title for this, and he handed him some magazine and said, look through this magazine and see if you can find a title. And on the title of the magazine was the words Adam, Heart, Mother, and it was about a mother receiving like a heart transplant, and so that's apparently where they got it from. It's great. The album cover is also iconic. This is Hypnosis. They were famous in the 70s, did all the Pink Floyd records, did, you know, just a ton of albums during the 70s in that era. It's sort of an iconic thing here, just with the cow. It's so simple, but just jumps right out at you. It's great. So I love it. This is one of my favorite like incorporations of orchestra and band. I just think it's great. The choir, just the way the whole thing moves, and the way it ends on like a big, you know, big held out chord and everything. It's awesome, and it's been performed. You can find on YouTube Geeson conducting an orchestra, I think in Spain, doing it, and it sounds great. I think Gilmour did it once somewhere with Geeson. I don't know if Geeson was involved or if he just did it with somebody else who put it on. At the time, the band sort of wrote it off as like a failed experiment, but I think as time has gone on, people have come to appreciate this, and it's sort of, like I mentioned at the beginning here, a real hidden gem in their catalog. It's something that I just love. And for 1970, you know, it's pretty cool and pretty ahead of its time for 1970. Side 2 then sort of imitates Ummagumma, where each artist writes kind of their own piece. And it starts with If, Roger Waters, which is just sort of gentle acoustic thing. Roger almost speaking when he singing, but he's so like mellow and so soft. That's something I always loved about Pink Floyd, is they'll do these pieces where they're almost like whispering when they're singing, and it's just so gentle, and this is a good example of that. Summer 68, yes, 68. I almost said summer 69, that's Bryan Adams. Summer 68, this is Richard Wright, his piece on here. I like this one because it starts off with one feel, and then it just sort of changes feel and goes into this other, how would you feel, and then there's more brass in this one, which sort of harkens back to the first side of the record here, and there's this big like melodic trumpet fanfare type line that I think is really cool. Fat Old Son is David Gilmour, and interestingly, from what I read here, Gilmour hadn't really written much up to this point, and they sort of forced him, like, okay, you've got to write a song, we're leaving you alone in the studio, you've got a couple hours, come up with something. And he came up with Fat Old Son, and it's a great, great song that apparently David Gilmour really still likes to this day. It's one of his favorite songs and still will occasionally perform. Very melodic. David Gilmour, kind of like Roger's part earlier. He's very soft-spoken, but it's very, very mellow, and it's just a really, really nice song. The album ends with Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast, which I guess is supposed to be Nick Mason's thing, although it's credited to everybody in the band. This one is a little bit of a throwaway for me. It's kind of a failed... here's an experiment that failed for them, in my opinion. It's got a lot of sound effects, the sound of a guy like eating breakfast and stuff, and there's some piano stuff that comes in, but it never really goes anywhere. It just kind of sits there. And apparently they have been experimenting live a lot with this type of thing, like sound effects, and I guess they had a piece that they were doing at one point where they would actually stop playing and eat breakfast on stage, and I guess so this was sort of inspired by that, but unfortunately it just sort of falls flat and doesn't really go anywhere. But all right, there you go. Pink Floyd, Atom Heart Mother, an album that I really like, that I feel is kind of, you know, off the radar for Pink Floyd. A lot of people don't know about it. So let me know in the comments down below, what do you guys think of Atom Heart Mother? Let me know, and make sure you check out the Lair, the Alchemist Spotify podcast. And until we see you again, make sure you rock hard, ride free.